As heavy rain swept across Havenbrook, a German shepherd stepped out from the shadows, soaked fur clinging to a strong frame, eyes glowing with a story no one had heard. Before Officer Stephen, it gently placed a half-soaked sandwich on the ground. An act that seemed simple, yet sparked a chain of events that would shake the city to its core. In that quiet gaze was memory loyalty, and the final clue to someone who had vanished without a trace. What brought the dog to that exact moment? And why was Stephen the one it chose to find the truth? Follow the story to uncover the final message. Rocky was born to deliver. The rain came down on Havenbrook like a storm in fury. Heavy drops hammered the streets, shattering the glow of yellow lamps into shards across puddles that gleamed like fractured glass. Wind hissed through narrow alleys, cutting sharp and cold, as if the whole city had pulled itself tight into a weary, soaked shell. Stephen turned up his collar and stepped out of the police station. His night shift was over. His shoulders sagged, not from the weight of a gun or the cuffs at his side, but from a long day of empty cases that led nowhere. All he wanted was to go home, brew a hot cup of tea, sink into his chair, and let the day fade away like smoke. But at the corner of the opposite alley, something held him still. A dog. It stood unmoving in the rain. Its fur was drenched, clinging to a strong frame. The streetlight caught its gray-brown coat, making it blend into the dark stone. Yet its eyes were different, deep and bright, as though they had been waiting there for a long time. Stephen stopped. The dog didn't bark, didn't run. It only looked at him. Then it walked forward slowly, carrying half of a torn sandwich in its mouth. Bread split open, cold meat soaked with rain. It set the sandwich at Stephen's feet, then sat breathing steady gaze unbroken. Stephen frowned. His instincts told him this was no accident. A stray wouldn't do this. A dog wouldn't deliver food at midnight to a stranger, unless— "Who are you?" Stephen murmured. His voice swallowed by the rain. The dog tilted its head. No reply was needed. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke without words. Not a cry for help. A message. Stephen crouched, reaching out slowly. The dog didn't pull back. Its wet nose touched his hand, then rested its head there, as if it had always known him. He looked around. No one. No sound of cars. The street felt emptied, holding only two figures seeking shelter from the storm, a man and a dog. "All right, come home with me." The dog rose and walked beside him, steps firm shoulders, steady paws unwavering. This was no ordinary stray. Stephen knew that much. Back at his third-floor apartment, Stephen dried the dog with an old towel. It stayed calm, as though used to such care. From the fridge, he gathered leftover meat and rice. The dog ate slowly, neat and careful, trained habits showing in every bite. "Maybe you were canine once," Stephen muttered. When he settled into his chair, the dog approached, rested its head on his lap, and lay down. Breathing even, eyes half-closed, ears still upright in alert. Stephen glanced at the window. Rain drummed on. The Havenbrook night stretched long, but inside this room for the first time in months, something softened. He bent down, brushing his hand over the dog's head. "I'll call you Rocky." The dog's eyes opened, meeting his. Silent, but agreeing. The name had slipped out, yet felt right. Perhaps it was the steady gaze, or the way Rocky had laid that sandwich before him, as if offering more than food, as if entrusting him with something heavier. Stephen didn't fully understand, but he knew this Rocky had chosen him. And in the damp chill of Havenbrook's night, the eyes of a dog brought more warmth than any fire. By morning, the storm had passed. Havenbrook lay draped in a gray mist of skies after rain. A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of wet earth and dew clinging to old brick walls. Stephen woke to the sound of steps circling the room. Rocky was pacing, inspecting every corner with practiced calm. Not hurried, not restless. Each step steady, precise, deliberate. Pouring coffee, Stephen watched. From every movement to the way Rocky sat, there was discipline in it. Too exact, too controlled. "You've been trained," Stephen said softly. Rocky lifted his head. Ears pricked at once. After a simple breakfast, Stephen approached with a soft cloth. Gently, he turned Rocky's left ear. Beneath the pale fur was a line of small inked numbers, K9 HT0452. Stephen froze. It was a tattoo, standard for K9 units, each with its own code. But the letters made his chest tighten, HT short, for Havenbrook Tactical, the division known for training specialized dogs. He sat down, eyes fixed on that mark. "If you're K9, then where's your handler?" Rocky didn't answer. He simply walked to the window, sat down, and stared outward with that same watchful habit. Silent, yet heavy, with untold truth. Stephen pulled his phone. Within the police system, he searched the database for retired or missing K9 units. He typed in the code. The screen lit up. Unit K9 HT0452, alias Rocky. Last assignment. Investigative journalist Emily Evans, status missing handler. Unaccounted for. Last recorded 2 months ago. Stephen's hand tightened. Emily Evans. The name was familiar. A journalist known for exposing land fraud and money laundering schemes. 2 months back, she had vanished. Her reports stopped abruptly. No updates. Friends stayed silent. The story faded into silence. No one mentioned her anymore. And now her dog was here in his apartment. Stephen stepped closer to Rocky. "You came looking for help, didn't you?" The dog looked up. No nod, no sound. Yet its gaze lingered longer than before, its tail flicking once, slow, deliberate, as if confirming without words. The room grew still. Stephen spread out documents across the table. He marked Emily's disappearance date against Rocky's last record. The same day. When Emily vanished, Rocky vanished too. No report, no search. Forgotten. Only one possibility remained. Rocky had seen everything. And since that day, the dog carried a truth no one else had noticed. Stephen closed his eyes briefly. He remembered the half sandwich placed before him in the rain. Not an offering for food, but a sign. A lead. A call. He opened his laptop. News clippings appeared scattered with half-finished theories and rumors. One detail caught his eye. A week before vanishing, Emily had been digging into a corporation called Sterling Corp., a company buying up abandoned sites on the city's edge. And last night, Rocky had led him past those same grounds. Stephen turned to him. "You'll take me there tonight, won't you?" Rocky looked back. No bark, no whine. Just one step forward, tail flicking again. The quietest yes. Stephen leaned into the chair, eyes on the old headline glowing on his screen. Emily Evans. Her words sharp, her smile firm yet kind, frozen in the photograph attached to the missing report. "Emily Evans," he whispered. Beside him, Rocky lay quietly on the floor. But the moment he heard that name, the dog sprang up. Ears rigid, eyes wide, breath quickening into sharp bursts. He rushed to the desk, paws pressed against the chair, gaze locked on the image glowing from the screen. Stephen froze. A low whimper slipped from Rocky's eyes, shifting between confusion and restlessness. His tail flicked once, short and abrupt, then stilled. His entire frame stood taut, waiting like a soldier bracing for a command. That reaction was no coincidence. "You knew her," Stephen whispered. "You were with her, weren't you?" Rocky lowered his head, then lifted it again, eyes still fixed on Emily's photo. Stephen scrolled through the old reports on his phone. In one crime scene shot just at the edge, there was a faint gray blur. A German shepherd's shadow, blurred but unmistakable. It was you. The photo dated only a week before Emily's disappearance. Stephen enlarged the frame, studying every grain. On the dog's neck was a faint glimmer of something, a tag, likely an identification badge. Rocky tore his eyes from the screen and moved toward the door. His nose brushed the handle head, angled outward. Stephen followed. The dog had chosen him, and now he wanted to lead him somewhere clearer. They left the apartment. Havenbrook's streets still glistened damp, but the sky was brighter, the air tinged with the sharp green scent of leaves washed clean by rain. Rocky strode ahead, steady and quick, like retracing an old route. He guided Stephen into the older quarter, where squat buildings leaned tired against one another, some abandoned altogether. Stopping before a shuttered apartment block, Rocky paused. Its walls wore stains of moss, its doors locked with rusted chains. But beside it was a narrow path leading to a back entrance where the hinges had long since failed. Rocky slipped through first. Stephen followed. Inside, the air was thick with damp and rot. Light filtered through broken slats, just enough to reveal a bare living room. Rocky stopped at a corner where a bookshelf once stood. He nudged the floor with his nose, scattering dust, then sat down. Stephen knelt. Beneath the dust was a faint circle, the kind left when something heavy had been fixed there for years. He flicked on his flashlight. Along the edge of the floorboards was a thin crack. He pried it open carefully, revealing a hidden hollow. Inside lay a black USB stick, bound with an old frayed hair tie. Stephen glanced at Rocky. The dog sat still watchful. He pocketed the USB. "You kept this safe," he murmured. 2 whole months. Rocky's tail gave a soft flick. Not joy, but relief. After carrying a secret alone at last, someone understood. Back at the apartment, Stephen plugged the USB into his laptop. A single folder appeared marked with dates, and one word, Phoenix. Inside, photos of contracts, audio recordings, financial statements, even a short video of Emily meeting a man in a dark suit. His face blurred, his voice deep, but disturbingly familiar. A note accompanied the files. "If I disappear, find Rocky. He knows the way. And if you are reading this, trust no one in the force until you've checked every step." Stephen closed the screen. The room seemed to hold its breath. Rocky sat at his side, spine straight, eyes bright. A silent sentinel. "You're more than a partner," Stephen said. "You're the one who survived." Rocky blinked slowly, lowering his head as if confirming. Stephen leaned back, thoughts racing, puzzle pieces sliding into place. Emily's disappearance was no closed case. It was only beginning. Evening dimmed. Pale light fractured through the window, spreading across the room like shards of old memory. Stephen shut the laptop. The files remained untouched by anyone until now. But one question burned. If Emily had gathered all this proof, why had she vanished without a trace? Rocky moved toward the door again, head tilted, listening to something deeper than the street noise. "You want to keep going?" Stephen asked, rising. Rocky turned silent. No bark, no retreat. Just steady steps toward the stairwell, as though he already knew the path. This time Stephen didn't need to ask again. They crossed the weathered streets, turned into a forgotten lane lined with broken fences and tall grass brushing Stephen's waist. At its end loomed Echo Hollow Park, once alive with families now sealed off after a landslide. Its gate sagged under moss, the sign broken mid-word, a half-tilted hoe, creaking in the breeze. Rocky didn't hesitate. He slipped inside, weaving past soft ground, like one who'd walked here many times. Stephen's flashlight cut through the gloom. Rusted swings, cracked slides, faded drawings, smeared on collapsing walls. The place was a ghost of laughter. But Rocky pressed on until they reached a solitary maple at the far edge, standing guard over a scar of sunken earth. At its roots, Rocky sniffed hard, then began clawing away at the soil. Stephen dropped beside him, digging through the damp earth. Minutes later, his fingers struck metal. Together, they unearthed a small steel box, heavy and scratched. He opened it. Inside lay a silver hard drive, sealed tight in waterproof casing, and a weathered leather notebook, edges swollen with damp. Stephen flipped it open. On the first page, one careful line: "If I vanish, trust the data. Never trust the promise." Emily. He swallowed hard, a chill running through him. These were more than files. They were the last fragments of her hope. The hard drive bore a paper strip with numbers scribbled M4551. A storage code, Stephen muttered. She sent something to a vault. Rocky stayed by the tree eyes, fixed on the notebook, as if those words were the final tether between two lives. Stephen turned more pages. Dense notes in Emily's hand traced her investigation into Sterling Corp money trails, shell projects, stolen funds from community restoration. But near the end, one entry stopped him cold. "I believe someone inside the department has been bought. I can't name them yet. All I know is Rocky recognized him first. When he entered the room, Rocky stepped back. Stephen's grip tightened on the notebook. Faces flashed in his mind. Odd conversations. Avoided questions whenever Emily's name arose. "We're in deeper than I thought," he murmured, barely believing his own voice. Rocky left the roots and stood by his side. Solid calm, a quiet anchor in the desolation. Stephen tucked the hard drive and notebook into his bag. As they turned to leave, drizzle began again. Fine drops settling on Rocky's fur, glittering like glass beads in the beam of the flashlight. Echo Hollow Park disappeared into fog behind them. Only two sets of footprints remained, a man and a dog, carrying with them a faint light, perhaps just enough to expose Havenbrook's darkest corners. The road out of Echo Hollow lay drowned in mist and the dim scatter of street lamps. Stephen pulled his jacket zipper high, the hard drive and notebook tucked inside. A pair of fragile objects that could shake all of Havenbrook if they landed in the right hands. Rocky paced beside him, steady stride, but ears twitching every few steps, head tilting as if catching faint sounds hidden in the air. Stephen barely noticed. His mind churned on Emily's note, the line etched into his skull. Rocky stepped back when he walked in. The words repeated like the soft tap of knuckles on a wooden desk. They turned onto the main street. 3 blocks from the apartment, Rocky froze. Stephen had only just looked back when headlights swept across the wet pavement. A gray SUV windows tinted. No horn. No rush. Just rolling slow, holding the kind of distance meant to slip under notice. Stephen slowed. Rocky stayed rooted, body curved, head lowered, front legs braced like a bowstring drawn tight. The SUV rolled on, shadowing them. When Stephen veered into a narrow side street, the car stopped at the mouth of the alley, headlights spilling against brick. No door opened. Stephen's grip tightened on the bag strap. He breathed slow, eyes lowered, watching the reflection of the SUV from the corner of his vision. Rocky growled once, short, sharp, a warning of readiness. Stephen nodded. They moved deeper into the dim alley. But just as they turned the next corner, the sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet. The SUV peeled away, swinging onto another route, vanishing into the city's veins. "They're done tailing us," Stephen muttered. He turned back. The street lay empty save for wet tire marks glistening on the asphalt. Rocky sat eyes fixed where the car had gone, chest heaving, not from exhaustion, but tension. "You sensed it before me," Stephen whispered. "If you hadn't stopped, I'd have stepped into those headlights." Rocky looked at him, eyes steady, a silent nod. They returned through an old parking lot, slipping in by a side entrance. Curtains drawn door, locked lights cut until only a faint glow from the kitchen remained. Stephen collapsed into a chair, shoes off, but gaze never straying from the door. Rocky curled close, yet stayed awake, ears flicking, chin lifted like a night sentry. Stephen powered up the laptop, slotting in the hard drive they'd uncovered. A window bloomed. Password required. He typed the code from the label, M4551. The files opened. Sterling Corp's financial skeleton spilled out shell branches, funds, circling through false charities, contracts bound with the local government's ink. But one folder made Stephen's pulse leap, titled Havenco. Havenco, once the banner project to rebuild Echo Hollow Park, shuttered for lack of funds. Yet the documents showed money flowing steady, channeled through 3 proxy companies. One registered under the delegated authority of a police officer. Stephen swallowed hard. He looked at Rocky. "He's one of us," Stephen murmured. Emily was right. The room thickened with silence. Outside, someone was watching. Whoever it was knew Stephen had found what Emily left behind. And they were already close. Stephen's hand rested on Rocky's head. No slip-ups from here on. Rocky lifted his gaze. In the dark, his amber eyes flared like embers. Morning broke heavy gray as Stephen's thoughts. He arrived at the precinct earlier than usual, with the hard drive cloned and key pages printed. Rocky stayed behind. Stephen wouldn't risk bringing him into a building where friend and traitor wore the same badge. The station hummed its ordinary tune, coffee burbling keyboards, rattling phones, jangling. A few officers traded rushed jokes between shifts. But under it all was a strange quiet, the sort that prickled his skin. As he crossed the bullpen, he felt glances land on him. Quick, then averted. He stopped at the commander's door. Knock, knock. Come in. Stephen entered, closing the door behind him. Lieutenant Halloran sat straight at his desk, silver hair, cropped half-rim glasses perched low. "Morning, sir. I need to report something." Stephen laid the folder down. Halloran looked over the pages. "Where did you pull this from? A hard drive. Found at Echo Hollow. Tied to Emily Evans' disappearance. I believe this is why she was silenced, or still being held." Halloran tapped the desk with one finger. "And do you have solid proof IDs, DNA witnesses? Not yet." But Rocky, her canine, led me there. And the files show Sterling Corp channeling money into ghost projects with inside help. Halloran exhaled, slid the folder back. I understand your urgency, Stephen, but this is a police department, not a newsroom. We work on evidence, not suspicions, so you'll just sit on it. Stephen's voice edged sharp. If Emily brought this before and was brushed aside the same way, no wonder she vanished. You're out of line, and you're dodging. Stephen straightened. If I have to, I'll take this to the press. Halloran's eyes narrowed. Be careful with your words. This isn't a game. Stephen gathered the papers. Neither is her life. He walked out, heart hammering, not from rage but from the weight of knowing. Someone inside was covering the rot. That afternoon, in a quiet corner cafe, a low voice came from behind him. You're digging into a pit plenty have slipped into. Stephen turned. Raymond, an old hand once a K-9 trainer, now tucked into paperwork years. He placed a tray down, slid into the seat opposite. What have you found? Raymond asked evenly. Stephen hesitated, then met his eyes. I think someone in the department is tied to Sterling Corp. Raymond nodded slowly. So do I. For years. Stephen blinked. Then why has no one spoken? Because the first who tried got reassigned. The second disappeared. The third was Emily Evans. Stephen's grip tightened on his cup. Raymond leaned closer. She came to me once asking about public land deals. I gave her a list of sites pitched for parks, later stripped of funding. Echo Hollow was on it. Do you know who's behind it? I can't be sure. But one night a man from Internal Affairs was seen pulling files from evidence. That was the night Emily vanished. Pieces slid into place inside Stephen's mind. Raymond's voice dropped lower. You're close, but don't bare your face. Every step from now has to be measured. Sterling isn't just a company, it's a web. Stephen nodded. Raymond rose, patting his shoulder. If you need, come to my place. I've got recordings Emily sent me before she went dark. Only she and I knew where they're kept. Stephen watched him fade into the crowded street, another shadow swallowed by the city. But his words clung like smoke. The third was Emily. Stephen drew a long breath. From here on, every footprint would leave a mark on glass, and someone was already watching from the other side. The night in Havenbrook pressed heavier than usual. No rain, no wind, only silence clinging to rooftops and window frames as though the entire city was holding its breath for something about to unfold. Stephen sat by the half-open window, a cup of water long gone cold in his hand. Most of the lights in the apartment were off, leaving only a faint glow from the kitchen corner, enough to cast two shadows on the floor. One of a man, one of a dog. Rocky lay near the door. Posture deceptively calm, though his eyes remained open, head lifted, ears tuned to every murmur in the hallway outside. Since they had returned to the apartment, he had barely closed his eyes. No order, no command. Rocky simply chose to stand guard. Stephen had seen many working dogs in his career, dogs that braved fire, plunged through water, and entered places where no one else dared. Yet Rocky carried something different. No bravado, no forced show of strength, only the quiet weight of a mission unfinished, as if he were carrying the last thread of someone else's duty. Stephen rose, crossed the room, and stopped by his side. Rocky didn't move, only shifted his gaze to him. Still awake, Stephen's voice was barely above a whisper, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness draped over the room. Rocky flicked a glance toward the door, then back at him. Expecting someone. Stephen lowered himself onto the floor, back resting against the wall beside the dog. There was no reply, but the silence said enough. Not fear. Readiness. Minutes stretched. Stephen reached out, brushing his hand across Rocky's head. The fur was warm, dense, and clean. His breathing had grown heavier, tired but unwilling to yield. When I lost the trail in the park, you found it. When we were followed, you caught it first. And now you're keeping watch, so I can sleep. He gave a short laugh, gratitude woven into the sound. You do everything, Rocky. Rocky blinked, gaze still anchored on the door. For a moment, Stephen thought of Emily, the one who had trusted Rocky first, who left behind the note. If I disappear, find him. Perhaps she had known Rocky would never abandon the mission. Perhaps she had given him something greater than loyalty, a promise. Stephen took the jacket draped over a chair and laid it lightly across Rocky's back. The dog didn't need it, but it was all he could offer. You can rest easy. I won't let Emily's trail die out. His voice was low. Rocky stretched just enough to rest his head against Stephen's knee. For the first time in hours, his eyes closed. Stephen stayed still. Outside, fine rain began to fall, soft, and even like an unwritten score. He didn't sleep. He didn't need to speak further. In that silence, no vows were exchanged, no signatures carved into stone. Yet between man and dog, a promise held fast, spoken in looks, in Rocky's watchful posture, in Stephen's quiet vigil. A trust had taken root. They were not alone. And though the road ahead stretched long for now, they had each other. By afternoon, a thin blade of sunlight cut across Havenbrook's old rooftops. The air hung heavy. Stephen sat in the car engine, off, thoughts running far faster than any motor. Rocky stirred in the passenger seat as Stephen pulled the brake. This place was once a community relief warehouse. Emily mentioned it in her notes. Maybe. He trailed off, eyes narrowing at the structure ahead. The warehouse sat buried in the industrial district's ruins, fenced in by rust weeds rising waist-high. The sign was barely legible, only 2 faded words clinging on Grant and Sons. Rocky leapt down first, nose working, body taut. Each measured step told Stephen this place was more than a forgotten building. It was stamped into memory. They followed a worn path along the fence. A side door sagged off its hinges just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside stretched a cavern of shadow, high-ceiling steel racks draped in dust and cobweb. The air reeked of mold mixed with something acrid. Rocky halted by a corner pile of ash and shredded paper. Stephen's flashlight cut through the dark. Scattered pages charred at the edges, words still visible in fragments. Sub-branch code L42 and Transport Contract Level 3, Advance Pending. He crouched, lifting what could be salvaged. At the center of the ashes lay a half-burnt clip, binding 3 sheets stamped faintly, Certified Copy, Havenbrook Internal Affairs. Stephen looked up. On the far wall, a large whiteboard loomed, wiped nearly clean, but under the light chalk residue clung a crude diagram, 2 arrows linking 3 names. Havenco, Sterling, Project Resurrection. A maze had once been drawn here. Rocky sniffed at a broken file cabinet. Stephen yanked it open. Empty folders slumped inside, but jammed at the back was an employee ID card, Elijah Trask, Operations Supervisor. Stephen's memory stirred. That name had appeared in Emily's hurried notes, Elijah Trask. Underground contact only meets those brought by an insider. The insider, Stephen muttered. Rocky gave a low whine. Footsteps echoed behind them. Stephen killed the light, pulling Rocky into the cover of a rack. Footfalls. Slow, deliberate. A tall silhouette emerged at the far end, flashlight in hand, sweeping the aisles as though searching for something misplaced. The beam skimmed the corner walls, then fixed on the entrance. The man lingered, phone pressed to his ear. Nothing left. "Someone got here first. I'm heading back." He hung up, turned, and left. Stephen held Rocky close for minutes before easing forward. His breath slowed, but his mind raced sharper than ever. "We're out of time," he whispered. He gathered the burned fragments, pocketed the ID, and slipped out through the warehouse's rear. Weeds clawed at his trousers, wind slithered through cracks of broken concrete. By the car, Stephen glanced back. The warehouse stood silent, but its voice had spoken. Through ashes not fully burned, through Emily's traces, through the shadow that had arrived hours too late. On the drive back, Stephen spoke aloud to himself and to the dog beside him. Secrets aren't just hidden. They're hunted. But if you still remember the way back, Rocky, then we still have a trail. Rocky sat upright, eyes fixed ahead. That same fire glinted in them, as though still tracking someone who hadn't yet returned. Back at the apartment, long past midnight, Stephen double-locked the door and sealed the curtains. Rocky circled the room nose to corners, then sat by the door. His eyes sharp, as when they had crouched in the warehouse, shadows gleamed with instinct, sharpened by danger. Stephen settled at his desk. The hard drive was still connected. He reopened the Haven Co. folder. Page after page of finances, payrolls, tax codes, phantom supplier contracts. But at the bottom, one file stood apart, unnamed, but tagged with a cryptic line, PX3V. Stephen clicked it. A small window popped up, demanding a password. He tried entering the date of Emily's disappearance, April last year. Wrong. He tried Rocky's name. Wrong again. He glanced at the dog standing guard near the door. She wouldn't use anything that easy to guess. Flipping back through Emily's notebook, he found a page near the end. The ink smudged, half-faded. If someone finds the Phoenix file, it means I'm gone. Look to what we spoke of when it all began. Stephen frowned. Phoenix. Memory sparked. Emily once told him about her very first article written as an intern, the piece that set her on the path of exposing the shadows. Its title, Ashes Rise. He typed it in. The screen unlocked. The file unfolded into a sprawling folder, the first directory labeled Phoenix. Inside lay evidence he'd never seen: transfers between Sterling Corp. And a web of offshore companies' documents proving money laundering through fake construction projects, public land contracts sold at impossibly low prices, and worse, a list of local officials who had accepted unofficial sponsorships. Stephen scrolled slowly. City council members, a former auditor, and one name bolded: Elijah Trask, the man whose ID card he had found in the warehouse. But another folder sat at the bottom, internal. He opened it. Only a single video file. He hit play. The image showed an office captured from a hidden camera. A man stood by a desk, his voice digitally distorted but still cutting clear Emily. I warned you. This isn't something you should touch. Phoenix is just the cover. You really thought you were smarter. Then his hand reached into a drawer, pulling something wrapped in cloth. The screen glitched, fizzled, and went black. Stephen leaned back in his chair. She faced him directly, he whispered. Rocky stepped closer, raising his head to the screen. Stephen turned. Do you know who that was? A low rumble stirred in Rocky's throat. Not sharp, but waited with recognition. Stephen copied the entire Phoenix folder onto a backup USB, then mirrored it onto an external drive. We can't keep this in just one place. He stood stepping onto the balcony. Night air cut through his jacket. Havenbrook lay still as if nothing had happened. But now he knew Sterling Corp wasn't just a company. It was a network, a machine built to erase its own tracks, layering deception, pulling strings among those who wrote the rules. He looked up. No stars. Just the black sprawl of sky. Inside, Rocky still sat gaze fixed on the computer. And in that dim screen light, Stephen realized Emily hadn't left despair. Under the name Phoenix, symbol of rebirth, was enough proof to bring down the empire that had buried her in silence. If they endured, if they kept moving. Rain broke over Havenbrook without warning. The streets glazed with water street lamps smeared in the blur. Stephen drove out from the Eastern Warehouse District, where he had just met Raymond again, to collect an old recording Emily sent weeks before vanishing. Rocky sat upright in the back seat, spine-rigid eyes locked on the rear glass. The silence inside was taut as wire. A dog's instincts outpaced any alarm, and since leaving the warehouse, Rocky hadn't relaxed once. Stephen steered toward Fairview Bridge, an old span crossing the churned river, the shortcut back to the city center. Wind buffeted the car wipers, straining against the sheets of slanted rain. Then Rocky gave a low growl, the signal he'd learned to trust. Stephen checked the mirror. Headlights blazed on behind them. A dark car plates removed closing too fast. Low-frame tinted glass, designed for pursuit. Stephen's grip tightened. The car surged close, flashing headlights in a staccato rhythm language of intimidation. Stephen swerved, holding ground. But the bridge loomed. Long, narrow, no shoulder. If he crossed, there was a chance to reach crowded streets. If trapped mid-span, there'd be no exit. "Hold steady, Rocky," he muttered, accelerating. Tires screamed on wet asphalt. The pursuer pulled closer, beams blinding. Then it drew level on the left, swerving into Stephen's lane metal, nearly kissing metal. Rocky barked sharp, a cry of alarm. The enemy car swerved again, ramming to shove them into the railing. Stephen jerked the wheel. The car slammed against the steel guard, shrieking sparks. Below, the river twisted black and swollen. The dark car lunged again, this time straight for Stephen's front. Damn it! Stephen gritted his teeth, shifting hard, flooring the accelerator. But Rocky moved faster. He leapt into the front, throwing his weight against the wheel. The car swayed just enough. The collision missed by inches. The attacker smashed into the rail tires, shrieking metal buckling. Stephen spun clear, pushing across the bridge before the other could recover. Behind the lights, vanished into the storm. 2 blocks later, he pulled under the canopy of an old supermarket lot. His chest-hammered hands trembling on the wheel. Rocky slumped beside him, chest rising hard, eyes still locked outward. Stephen unclipped the belt, leaning close. "You okay?" Rocky exhaled, a sound halfway between fatigue and assent. Stephen lowered his head to the wheel. "They're done with threats. They want us dead." Rain battered the roof, but inside something shifted. No more doubt. No more question of going too far. That collision was the answer. He reached into the trunk, unzipped a canvas bag, pulling the USB marked Phoenix. This proof. It's what they fear. Rocky licked a cut on his leg, then lifted his gaze. No words. Only one message in his eyes. Keep going. Don't turn back. Stephen restarted the engine. From now on, every move would cut both ways. But he was no longer alone. Beside him sat a silent sentinel, who had chosen to stay until the end. Morning came without rain, but the Havenbrook sky remained draped in thin gray, like a curtain no one dared pull aside. Stephen walked back into the precinct, quiet, his coat dry, but the scrape on the car's side still fresh, a reminder of what he'd outrun and what lay ahead. Rocky stayed in the car. Stephen wouldn't risk attention. Carrying the USB loaded with Phoenix's mirror copy, he moved quickly into the admin wing, intending to send it anonymously to the State Oversight Office. But as he entered his section, something stopped him cold. His desk had been disturbed. A stack of files lay flipped upside down, and an empty coffee cup had been pushed toward the window, something no right-handed person would ever do. Stephen turned to search for answers when footsteps sounded behind him. A familiar voice. Looking for something. Stephen Lieutenant Barnes. His superior. The man he once respected. The one who had told him, "If you're in the right, I'll always be behind you." Stephen turned, keeping his composure. "Who touched my desk?" Barnes smirked. "You really thought you could move on your own without anyone noticing?" The words cut colder than the morning wind. Stephen searched his eyes for a hint of misunderstanding, but in Barnes's gaze there was only calm, brazen, unashamed. "I filed a report on Sterling Corp," Stephen said slowly. No one answered. "Because you're looking the wrong way," Barnes replied. It's bigger than you, Stephen. The people you're trying to pull down, they hold the whole system. Alone you can't change a thing." Stephen let out a bitter laugh. "So you chose to sell me out." Barnes paused, then said flatly, "I chose survival, like everyone else." The line hit like a slap. In that moment, Stephen saw it all. The silence in the precinct, the sidelong looks the chase on the bridge last night, each rooted in the same betrayal. Disdain flickered in his eyes. "Who did you hand me to?" Barnes gave no answer. He only studied him a moment longer, then stepped back. "If you're smart, you'll walk away. Wipe everything. Pretend it never happened. I wanted to help you once, but now it's out of my hands." Stephen nodded lightly as if agreeing, but as he left the office, his hand clenched the USB in his pocket. It felt like holding a match in the dark, fragile, easy to snuff out, yet capable of burning down the whole room if struck at the right moment. He strode to the parking lot. Rocky rose instantly when he saw him. "It's just us now," Stephen murmured, crouching beside the car. Rocky rested his chin on Stephen's knee, the gesture of a vow. Stephen glanced skyward. The clouds hung heavy, shutting out every trace of sunlight. But one truth had cleared the traitor wasn't far. He had been standing just behind him in the same meetings under the same roof. Stephen once believed that if you did right, truth would shield its keeper. Now he knew. Truth only survived if someone was willing to bleed to keep it alive. And in all Havenbrook, the only one he trusted sat beside him watching the station doors with eyes that promised to block any threat. By late afternoon, Havenbrook was bathed in a sad, faded gold. Rusted tracks cut through the woods leading to a place long erased from maps Southwell Station. Nearly an hour from the city, once a hub for military cargo abandoned, after a rail accident no one spoke of anymore. Stephen gripped the wheel, eyeing the half-broken sign choked with vines. In the back seat, Rocky stirred the moment the car turned onto the dirt road toward the station. Since leaving the precinct that morning, Rocky had kept looking east. That gaze held something precise, as though memory itself pulled him. Stephen knew. Working dogs didn't follow emotion. They followed scent. and the scent of memory lingered longer than any trail. They stopped at the crumbling depot. Glass shattered paint peeled. A rusted column crushed half the awning. Inside, shadows pooled, filled only with the whistle of wind through brick. Stephen lit his flashlight. Rocky charged down the narrow corridor that once led to storage vaults, nose to the ground, navigating with uncanny certainty. Stephen followed each step, cracking rubble underfoot. At the end, a chained steel door. The lock was rusted nearly shut, but the chain had been cut, marks fresh. Rocky growled low, pawing at the floor. Stephen knelt, light sweeping the concrete. Drag marks, rope scuffs, signs unmistakable someone had been held here. He pried the chain loose, pushed the door. A low-ceilinged chamber waited inside no windows, the air rank with mold and human presence long faded. At its center stood a metal chair. Beside it, frayed canvas restraints stained brown with old blood. On the wall, the faint print of a hand pressed hard in panic. Stephen stepped forward, trembling. Beneath the chair lay a silver necklace in the dust. He lifted it. A pendant plate engraved faintly E.E. Emily Evans. Rocky sank onto the floor, eyes fixed on nothing as if reliving what had happened here. Perhaps he had stood in this very spot, hearing her voice, breathing her fear. Now, it all returned sharp as yesterday. Stephen clenched the chain tight. She was here, held captive. Maybe her last night before she disappeared. He swept his light across the walls. In the corner, something caught. A slip of paper wedged in cracked mortar. He pulled it free. Half a torn sheet writing jagged, fading, yet still legible Phoenix. Not over. Find the one holding the key is inside. Stephen froze. Emily had left a trace, her final act. An unfinished note, yet enough she had fought until the end. And someone within the system carried the rest of the secret. He placed a hand on Rocky's back. We're close now. Rocky tilted his head, eyes deep, as though sensing Emily's spirit still lingered here. Stephen scanned the room again. Nothing more remained. Yet Southwell Station, once her prison, now held a living witness. Rocky, the bearer of memory, stepping with him through the dark. They left as night pressed down. Behind them, Southwell loomed silent as a ghost. But Stephen knew within those walls he had brushed the truth. To retreat now would be to betray everything Emily had endured. In a small room at the end of a third-floor hall, Stephen sat motionless at his desk. The yellow lamp swung faintly in the draft through the window. Silence wrapped the space, broken only by Rocky's breathing at his feet, and the crackle of an old recorder he had just switched on. The tape had been found inside a wooden box hidden behind a shelf at Emily's parents' home, the place she lived before moving to Havenbrook. No one had noticed it until Rocky pawed the wall 3 times, signaling a secret worth uncovering. Stephen stilled as the voice began. Emily's voice, husky but steady with every word. If you're hearing this, it means I've gone too far, and I can't come back. Stephen held his breath. Rocky lifted his head, ears tilting toward the recorder. I don't know when they'll find me. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a few weeks, but I know my time is short. If you believe in the truth, please, don't stop. The sound crackled with static, but her voice still carried trembling not with fear but with urgency. They have power. They control government, media, everything. I've gathered so much, but there's one last link, the insider helping them from within. I haven't uncovered him yet, but someone has. Stephen leaned closer, heartbeat drumming. That person, I never met, but Rocky has seen him. Rocky remembers his face. his scent. He knows. Emily's voice slowed. Footsteps echoed faintly. She was pacing the room as she spoke. Rocky is part of this investigation. He's not just the dog I adopted. He's my partner. He saved me once, and I believe he still wants to do it again. A pause. Then her final words, light yet firm, wrapping around Stephen's chest like a tightened cord. If someone finds this, trust Rocky. The tape clicked off. The static died. Silence swallowed the room. Stephen sat unmoving, his hand tightening against the desk. Rocky padded forward and laid his chin on Stephen's leg. She knew it all, Stephen whispered. She knew she wouldn't come back. But she left the door open for whoever came after. He lowered a hand onto Rocky's head. You're not just a witness. You're Emily's living legacy. A wave surged through him. Not sorrow, but the sense of a vein still pulsing. He wasn't chasing vague shadows alone anymore. He was carrying forward what she had begun. And beside him walked the quiet, resolute dog who bore memories no human could read, only feel. Stephen rose, turned toward the window. The sun had already slipped behind the trees, the last light fading fast. But inside him, something else ignited. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and unshakable. From this day, he was no longer acting out of duty as a cop. He was acting for a message left in the dark, for the faith of someone who had fallen, and for the gaze that followed his every step, the gaze of Rocky. In the heart of the city, Sterling Tower loomed like a blade of steel cut into Haven Brook's gray sky. 18 floors of glass guards at every entrance. Biometric gates. Not a place a district detective could walk into, unless he became someone else. In a cheap hotel room near the bus terminal, Stephen stood before the mirror. Gone was the uniform. Instead, a slate-gray jacket, an open-collared white shirt, a loosened tie, the look of a temporary systems contractor often hired by big firms. In his pocket, a fake pass Raymond had cobbled together good enough for a scan if no one dug too deep. Rocky had been trimmed at the ruff, fitted with a reflective vest stamped Security Support K9. He looked the part of a private service dog, unobtrusive among the morning flow of workers. Stephen crouched, hand on Rocky's shoulder. One circuit. Find the archive floor, then we're out. Rocky blinked once, tail giving the smallest flick. He understood. At 8 sharp, they joined the stream entering Sterling Tower. Stephen flashed the badge to the scanner. Green light. The turnstile clicked open. He almost couldn't believe it was that easy. But then again, when power convinces itself it's untouchable, complacency slips in. Reception on the first floor, conference rooms on the second technical departments up to the 10th. Stephen headed straight for the staff elevators. Inside, he glanced at the rough floor plan Raymond had marked. Internal storage. 9th floor. A forgotten sub-server Emily had once mentioned. If still alive, it might hold unpurged videos, strings of emails, a single name. Enough to complete the chain. The doors opened onto a gray carpeted corridor. Glass walls, polished tiles. He scanned quickly one camera in the corner. 2 IT staff, hunched over laptops, a guard near the far exit. Expression neutral, steps, steady ID, clipped to his shirt. Rocky walked flush to his heel, silent and composed, steadier than any weapon Stephen had ever carried. At the archive door, he knocked. A middle-aged tech opened. You're with maintenance, Stephen nodded. Notice said this room's cooling system needs another check before the backup transfer. The man sighed and stepped aside. The server room was dim humming, lit by lines of code running across screens. Stephen moved toward the third rack, the one tied to raw storage. Rocky halted mid-room, eyes on a vent in the corner. A soft growl escaped. Not alarm, but recognition. Stephen plugged in the USB data, scrolling across the screen. Outside footsteps echoed. A commanding voice carried through the hall. Verify the ID of the tech who just entered. Stephen glanced at the technician nearby. Give me 2 more minutes. If they ask, say I'm updating the cooling. Understood. The man barely nodded before Stephen leaned to Rocky. Signal me if anyone comes. Rocky moved to the door, ears pricked, eyes locked on shadows beyond the glass. On the monitor, streams of files. One stood out, dragged from cold storage, echo. Internal meeting audio. Emily Evans. An audio log. An internal meeting. Her name spoken inside their walls. Evidence untouched. Stephen copied it fast, disconnected. Outside, Rocky let out a sharp bark. The signal. Stephen snapped the USB free, nodded to the tech. Done. Thanks. Then he strode out, Rocky at his heel. They slipped into the elevator just as a guard rounded the corner. The doors shut. Stephen exhaled hard. Rocky tilted his head, asking without words, "Did we get it?" Stephen rested a hand on his head. "We got it, Rocky. This time, it's her voice. Right from the center of power." That night, Havenbrook glittered like a stage. Outside the Horizon Hotel, the city's grandest palace, cars lined up in rows, figures streamed over the red carpet, unrolled to marble doors. Golden chandeliers poured light 3 stories high, turning the gathering into a painting framed by power itself. Stephen stood across the street, clad in a dark suit and simple tie. A discreet earpiece hooked inside his ear, his eyes fixed on the grand entrance where guests were ushered in with polished smiles. At his side, Rocky crouched low beneath a parked car, eyes locked on every movement beyond, like a shadow lying in wait at the edge of a glittering stage. Tonight marked Sterling Corp's 30th anniversary gala, a celebration doubling as the launch of their international partnership project, the perfect cover for a money laundering machine long in motion. Stephen had heard the recording from the 9th-floor server, Lucius Sterling's calm baritone bargaining with government officials about converting black capital into legitimate assets through community programs. All hidden behind neat reports, signatures, and handshakes like the ones on display tonight. The revolving doors opened. Lucius Sterling emerged immaculate in a black tuxedo silk collar, gleaming silver hair combed neatly back. His smile carried the composure of a man who had long since rewritten the world in his favor. Upstairs on the 12th floor, the banquet hall filled with hundreds of businessmen, government advisors, local officials, and familiar media allies. No one mentioned Emily Evans, the reporter who once investigated Sterling Corp, and then vanished in silence. Stephen checked his watch. In 10 minutes, Lucius would take the stage holding the spotlight with his 10-minute speech. That was the window, his only chance to hijack the live broadcast. "We get just one shot," he whispered. Rocky lifted his head, ready. Stephen crossed the street, slipping into the hotel's side entrance for staff. With Raymond's help, he carried a one-use security pass, good for the service elevator. On the 11th floor, he walked straight into the control room. A heavy-set man hunched over broadcast equipment. Stephen flashed a badge. Last-minute update from the organizers. "I'm here to load the new media file." The man scowled. "Got confirmation papers?" Stephen pulled up a forged email on his phone. While the man leaned in to check, Rocky nudged the coffee cup on the desk, sending it crashing over the backup console. "Damn it," the man cursed, leaping up. "I'll handle it." Stephen cut in quickly, sliding a small USB into the auxiliary port. The file loaded automatically Emily Evans Audio Phoenix.mp3, disguised under the title, Anniversary Opening Video. Downstairs, the main screen lit up just as Lucius Sterling strode onto the stage. The first sound was a woman's voice. "My name is Emily Evans. If you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer here." The entire hall froze. Lucius frowned, gaze flicking up at the screen. "I was hunted by Sterling Corp. After uncovering their laundering network hidden behind charity projects. I once believed I could expose them with reason, with facts. But then I learned, no one listens when you stand alone." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras wavered, but Emily's voice still filled the air. "This recording isn't a cry for help. It's a warning to whoever comes next. Don't trust the stories laid neatly under the lights." Stephen yanked the USB free and slipped out. In the hall, guards stirred Lucius, signaling to cut the feed. But the recording played through to its end. By the time Stephen and Rocky sprinted down through the kitchens and out to the side lot, alarms blared behind them. He didn't look back. Rocky sat in the passenger seat, silent, steady. She spoke. "Rocky." Stephen murmured, eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the rear view, Sterling Tower's glow flickered like a dying beacon. Stephen had never believed in miracles. Yet in that breathless silence between racing heartbeats, he realized some things weren't meant to be explained, only carried forward. The broadcast had rattled the giant. Sterling Corp would tighten its grip. The corrupted police would close ranks. And though Emily's voice had reached the world, the core truth, her fate, remained unanswered. Rocky still held the key. After the chaos of the gala, while guards swept Sterling Tower in disarray, Rocky trailed a scent with uncanny precision. He led Stephen back into the deserted banquet hall. The chandeliers were dark, the sound system shut down. But Rocky ignored the silence, heading toward the stage's wings. On the wooden floor, fresh shoe prints lingered. Rocky stopped before a small podium, once holding a projector nose pressed to the boards. He scratched 3 times. Stephen knelt. "What is it?" He tapped the floor. Hollow. Shoving the podium aside, he revealed a faint seam, a hidden hatch. A magnetic lock sat at the edge. Stephen wedged it open with a tool. Click. The hatch lifted. A breath of damp air rose out, metallic and stale. A narrow iron staircase descended into the dark. Rocky slipped down first claws, ticking against the rungs. Stephen followed, flashlight cutting through. The bunker was compact, reinforced with concrete, soundproofed. At its core, behind a second iron door, lay a cramped room, a folding cot, a metal locker, and a figure curled in the corner. Stephen froze. Rocky halted, eyes glowing in the dim light. He moved forward slowly, lying against the door, whimpering. A greeting. The figure lifted her head. Hair tangled, face pale. But the eyes, he recognized them instantly. They were the same eyes staring out from the last photos she had ever published. Emily Evans. Rocky. Her voice cracked, a whisper scraped raw. Stephen rushed forward, wrenching the lock. "Emily." She nodded faintly, unable to summon more. Stephen knelt, his hand steady on her shoulder. Thin, ice-cold. The stench of metal and mildew clung to her, evidence of months in captivity. "We've been searching for you," he said, fighting to keep his voice calm. Emily glanced from him to Rocky. "He still remembers." Rocky pressed his head against her lap. She smiled weakly, trembling fingers stroking his back, the kind of touch that erased time, as if the darkness had never broken the bond. Stephen checked quickly. No grave injuries, but her body was frail, starved. Beside the cot sat bottles of water packs of dried food. Someone had kept her alive. Not to save her, but to silence her. Stephen clicked on the comms. "Raymond, I need an ambulance. Urgent. We've got a survivor." Raymond's voice cracked. "Emily. She's alive." Stephen turned. Emily looked back at him. Her eyes, though weary, still carried the flame of someone who had once stood alone in the storm and refused to kneel. "Are you ready to tell it all?" he asked. Emily gave a faint nod. "As long as the world still wants to listen." Stephen squeezed her hand, then glanced at Rocky. The shepherd lay pressed close, amber eyes, steady, radiating silence, courage, and warmth, the only light Emily had known in that underground cell. A strange feeling rose in Stephen's chest, as though from this moment forward they were no longer hunters of the truth, but living witnesses of it. And their story, kept alive by a dog who never strayed, was still being written. He guided Emily up the narrow stairwell behind the hidden hatch. Draping his jacket across her shoulders, he steadied her down the service hallway. Rocky paced ahead, eyes fixed on every corner. Inside the Horizon Hotel, chaos still lingered after Emily's voice had spilled across the airwaves. Guests whispered furiously, reporters scrambled for Wi-Fi, and Sterling Corp's private security locked down the exits. At the grand lobby, Lucius Sterling's expression darkened as word came from the tech team traces from the basement had been found, possibly linked to Emily Evans. His hand tightened on his champagne glass. He set it down, voice like steel lock, the entire first floor. "Anyone leaving without clearance? Detain them." Stephen and Emily pushed through the service hall, just 50 meters more to the rear lot, where Raymond waited in a running SUV. Then two men appeared ahead, dressed as guards. One's jacket shifted, revealing a weapon. Rocky's growl vibrated through the hall, not a threat, but a signal. Before the men could speak, Rocky launched forward like an arrow loosed. He slammed into the armed guard, toppling him hard to the floor. The second swung a baton, but Stephen drove a kick into his side, knocking him off balance. "Go, Rocky!" Stephen shouted. The shepherd darted back to cover Stephen's flank as he pulled Emily down the left corridor, the only exit not yet blocked. Sirens shrieked through the hotel. Red strobes flared across the ceilings. Upstairs, panicked guests shoved toward doors, unsure what was happening, but catching the scent of fear. Some reporters bolted for the street. Others streamed live from their phones. In moments, the banquet hall looked less like a gala than a terror drill. On the ground floor, Lucius Sterling's face remained eerily calm, though fire burned in his eyes. "Seal every floor. Block every exit. Whoever brings me the girl, 5-fold reward." Stephen hauled Emily toward the garage stairwell. Rocky loped alongside, hackles raised. Sweat ran cold down Stephen's back, but his grip on Emily never wavered. She could no longer speak, only stared wide-eyed at him, not with panic, but with a will to remember every moment. Just a little further, he reassured, though he wasn't sure it was true. The final door loomed, but 3 guards stood waiting. Stephen froze, breath ragged. No way around. Rocky stepped ahead for bristling. One guard reached for his belt when, whoosh, a black blur struck. Impact. A groan. Within seconds, all 3 men were down. Rocky rose tall over them, nose to the ground, eyes unblinking. Stephen shoved open the exit. Night air slammed in sharp and dusty. Far across the lot, SUV headlights flashed. Raymond had seen them. "Move," Stephen barked. Rocky sprinted first. Stephen carried Emily close, legs burning. Behind them, alarms blared, boots pounded, voices shouted. On the second-floor balcony, Lucius Sterling watched, his gaze locked on Emily. He neither blinked nor spoke, then turned away in silence. Raymond flung open the SUV's rear door. Stephen slid Emily inside and climbed in after. Rocky vaulted up, pressing against her. The engine roared, tires screamed. They sped into the night. Behind them echoed shouts, flashbulbs, the chaos of a world torn open by a recording a leap and the return of someone thought lost. Stephen looked at Emily. She leaned against Rocky hand, trembling across his fur. She whispered, hoarse but clear, "Thank you for not giving up." Stephen gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the dark road ahead. "This story," he said, "isn't over." The morning after the chaos, Havenbrook woke in shock. News splashed across every screen and feed, missing journalist returns alive. Sterling Corp, accused of concealment rescue dog at center of scandal. Stephen sat in the hospital corridor, shoulder aching from the night's fight, but mind sharp. Inside, Emily underwent her final checkup. Doctors said she could be discharged by evening. Raymond leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone. Internal Affairs had just released an updated list of officers under investigation for ties to Sterling Corp. The names were not few. Stephen clenched his fist. This was not over. It would never be that simple. Then the alarm blared from the lower floors. Panic. Shouts. Stephen and Raymond raced down the stairwell. Moments earlier, a nurse had entered Emily's room with a tray of medicine. She knew instantly something was wrong. This face hadn't appeared in 3 days of care. But before she could call out, the man lunged, pressing a cloth reeking of chemicals to her mouth. Emily struggled. The tray clattered to the floor. The door had not been locked. Rocky, lying just outside, sprang inside like lightning. The man drew a slim knife from his sleeve, pinning Emily to the bed. The blade hovered inches from her throat, but Rocky hit him first. Teeth clamped his wrist. The knife clattered onto the mattress. The shepherd pulled back, planting himself between the attacker and Emily, growl rumbling low. Stephen and Raymond stormed in seconds later. Stephen kicked the knife aside, grappling the man down while Raymond locked his shoulders. Hospital security swarmed. Doctors rushed to Emily's side. She was shaken, scratched, but alive. When the mask was stripped away, the assailant's face told the truth, one of Lucius Sterling's personal guards. Interrogation would bring no confession. But it no longer mattered. That afternoon, a special press conference was convened before a sea of cameras, reporters, and witnesses. Stephen guided Emily to the podium. She stood beside him, holding a thick file, records she had kept before the night she vanished. Beneath the stage, hundreds of people, journalists, honest officers, ordinary citizens, and human rights groups, waited. Some had only heard her voice in the leaked recording. Now they saw her in the flesh. And beside the podium, Rocky sat, calm, steady like a sentinel who had never abandoned his post. Stephen raised a gleaming pair of handcuffs toward the crowd. Lucius Sterling was arrested 1 hour ago. Charges kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy to conceal evidence, and large-scale abuse of power. Cameras flashed. The hall buzzed. Emily spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "What I gathered is no longer a secret. It belongs to the public. And I must say this. Without Rocky, I would not be standing here." Rocky tilted his head. Amber eyes catching the overhead lights. He didn't know the words, but he felt the pulse inside them. the heartbeat of trust kept alive by blood claws and ears that had listened through the dark. Lucius Sterling, brought in under special order, stood ringed by police. When Stephen met his eyes, the man still wore a thin smile, as though the world he had built remained untouched. But when Rocky rose, stepped forward, and locked his gaze on him, Lucius faltered. The smile vanished. Stephen gave a signal. 2 officers advanced, locking the cuffs. Each click echoed like a seal on the fall of an empire. The hall went silent. Emily gripped Stephen's hand, then bent to stroke Rocky's head. "You kept the promise," she whispered. Through the tall glass windows, the evening sun spilled across their shoulders, an image of a man, a woman, and a German shepherd, standing together, closing a chapter of chaos with the quietest, strongest peace. That morning, Havenbrook's City Hall overflowed with people. Broadcasters set up live feeds from 6 a.m. Flags fluttered in the early wind, though in the hearts of the crowd, the storm had already been blowing since the moment Emily Evans returned to the light. On the small stage, printed copies of the Phoenix Files were stacked high. Stephen stood with senior investigators holding a deposition folder. Raymond was there, too, carrying the internal dossiers from the police department. Emily, still under medical care, could not attend, but words she had written from her hospital bed were handed to the organizers. Stephen read them aloud. "Justice does not come from the stronger, the richer, or the louder. It comes from the quiet footsteps of those who refuse to turn away, even from a single life. I am alive because of Rocky. And I can speak again because someone believed the truth in his eyes." The crowd fell silent. Some wiped their faces. Others looked at the shepherd sitting beneath the podium, gazing upward as if knowing this moment was his. Stephen lowered the page voice, firm. "We have examined and cross-checked the entire Phoenix Drive. What it reveals includes money laundering schemes, abuses of authority, fraudulent contracts, lists of officials who took illicit payments and transaction chains hidden through 3 layers of shell companies." Behind him, a massive screen lit up with a web of names and connections once thought untouchable. With each name that appeared, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Stephen continued. "As of today, more than 20 officials have been suspended pending investigation. The State Department of Justice is now involved. Havenbrook Police will undergo a full restructuring." In the hospital, Emily lay listening to a radio broadcast. When the announcer began reading the names, she closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to finally let her burdens drift, something she hadn't dared in months. The door opened. A doctor entered, followed by a familiar nurse, the one who had cared for her since her rescue. And behind them, Rocky. The shepherd bounded softly onto the bed, laying his head across her legs. She smiled, fingers trembling as they stroked his ears. "You always know when to come," she murmured. The nurse smiled back. "The police gave special permission for Rocky to enter today. They said he has a title to receive." Back at City Hall, Stephen spoke once more. One last thing. He bent down, fastening a special tag around Rocky's neck, engraved with the words, "Rocky, honorary dog of Havenbrook, the one who brought truth home." The square erupted in applause. Rocky lifted his head, tongue out, ears high, as if listening to every cheer rise for him. Yet for him, perhaps the truest reward was simpler, lying beside Emily, feeling her steady breath again. That afternoon, Havenbrook grew quiet. Along a road leading out of the city, an SUV rolled gently forward. Stephen drove his face, carrying a rare ease. Raymond sat in the back, hand resting on the final stack of files to be submitted. Emily leaned into her seat, pale, but with eyes bright, stroking Rocky curled at her feet. Stephen glanced in the mirror. Time to return some peace to this place. Emily smiled. And to give him a real home. Rocky said nothing, just breathed steady as though still guarding the world from his very chest. Havenbrook, once a dark mark of corruption, was turning a page. And the one who had opened it was a stray shepherd who had carried half a loaf of bread and a gaze that cut through lies. The late autumn wind whispered through thinning trees like a gentle score for the fading day. On a hill east of Havenbrook, a small wooden house stood among fallen leaves. Smoke drifted from its chimney, a quiet greeting to the purple-washed sky. Stephen sat back in an old chair on the porch, cupping hot tea in his hands. Warmth seeped into his chest, not from fatigue, but from the rare feeling that for once he no longer had to chase anything. Beside him, Emily, wrapped in a gray wool scarf, leaned on the doorway, smiling softly. Her gaze lingered on the patch of grass before them, where Rocky lay curled, head resting on his paws pressed close against Stephen's chair. The fire in the stove kept burning its glow, flickering through the small glass window. Each time the flames leapt, a warm halo shimmered in Rocky's amber eyes, like a small lantern that never went out no matter how cold the night became outside. Stephen took a sip of tea, then lowered his hand to stroke Rocky's head. The dog shifted slightly tail, giving a faint wag without opening his eyes, as if that single touch was enough, as if no words were needed. "Isn't it strange," Emily murmured dreamily, "how there are people who walk with us for only a short distance, yet it feels like they've been there from the beginning." Stephen didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on Rocky. "Some people," he said quietly, "make us believe, without ever having to say a thing." Silence settled again. The peace was so complete that even the crackle of firewood sounded sharp and clear. In the distance, owls called to one another across the dusk sky. Rocky turned, resting his face toward Stephen and Emily. His eyes opened just a sliver, the amber glow reflecting the firelight, steady, silent, unshaken. That look carried no trace of fear, no shadow of battle. It held only one truth trust. Stephen set his cup down and slid to the wooden floor beside Rocky. Emily moved closer too, kneeling, her hand slipping gently into the thick fur around his neck. "He's guarded so many," she whispered, as if afraid to break the moment. "He's walked through too many chases, sacrifices, and losses." Stephen nodded. "And still chooses to sit here right now, as if—" He paused, then finished softly. "As if he understands everything that has happened and still chooses to stay." Inside, the fire glowed on. Its light spilled out onto the porch, painting 3 silhouettes on the wooden floorboards, one tall, one smaller, and one curled low and strong like a figure that had never stepped out of the story. Stephen lifted his gaze to the sky, where the last cloud dissolved into brilliant gold. He spoke under his breath, half to himself, half to something far away. "Maybe this is only a resting place." Emily smiled faintly. "And we don't yet know where the road will take us." Rocky closed his eyes again, releasing a slow, even breath. Tonight there would be no sirens, no pursuits, no shadows trailing them. Only the sound of fire, the quiet laughter of voices, and the steady gaze of a dog who had seen through every darkness and reminded them that true loyalty never needs to be taught, only trusted. Far below, the town of Havenbrook began to light up. Life went on, the city shifting and breathing as always. But higher up in a small home, warmed by firelight, 3 souls, once broken, once scattered, sat together quietly writing the next chapter of their lives. The story of Stephen, Emily, and Rocky was never only about survival. It was about finding faith again, in people in themselves, and in a dog who once wandered into a storm with nothing but half a loaf of bread. Rocky never needed to know what burden he carried. He simply followed instinct memory and an invisible promise to the man torn from his side. And in those amber eyes, people could finally see that loyalty lives not in bloodlines or training, but in a connection that words can never name. German shepherds, like Rocky, are admired not just for strength, intelligence, or service. They are remembered for the way they stand silently by our side, whether in battlefield's ruins or simply at the porch of a house with firelight inside. This story isn't meant to stir pity. It is a gentle reminder sometimes to save a life you don't need words. You only need a gaze that listens. And perhaps somewhere close there are still Rockies waiting, standing guard, waiting to be trusted, waiting for someone quiet enough to look into their eyes and begin a journey. No spotlight required, just faith and an outstretched hand.